her face say you lying. And I think you lying too. But anyway. Hey y'all, welcome and/or welcome back to my channel. My name is Janae, if you didn't know, and today's video is another true crime episode. So if you're ready, let's go. All right, y'all. So first and foremost, thank you to everybody who wished me a happy birthday. I tried to reply to everybody, but for some reason, sometimes I can't see all of y'all comments, and even when I go through the filter comments, I be missing stuff. So if I did not get a chance to reply to you, just know that I really did try, and I'm thanking you now. So yeah, I really did have a good birthday. I really did enjoy my birthday. I'm so grateful. Just so I'm just grateful, y'all. Anyway, I don't really have too much to say before today's video starts. I got the same nails that I had on in the last video. But I do want to acknowledge the fact that I do not have my wine in a wine glass today. I actually have it in this coffee cup because one of my friends bought me this coffee cup. I don't know when she bought it, but she bought me this cup, and she is from Ohio, and she made a special request that when I do the Ohio video, I have this coffee cup. So I got my wine in a coffee cup today. Also, real quick, I just spent 84 years trying to get this ring light to work. So I believe that it is time to let Susie go. I gotta get a new one, and I have ordered it, and it should be here today. Shout out to Amazon Prime. But I'm a little sad to see Susie go. I ain't even gonna hold you. Your time has come to an end. We thank you for what you've done for this channel, and you will truly, truly be missed. Anyways, with all that out of the way, we're going to go ahead and hop into today's case. And if you've been here for a little minute now, then you already know that we are going from the oceans to the lakes of America in alphabetical order. So from Alabama to Wyoming. And today we are in Ohio. So it's April 16th, 2016 in Akron, Ohio, when 911 gets a flood of calls at around 3 o'clock in the morning about a house fire. And this fire is located at 719 Fultz Avenue. Now, before the firefighters are able to get there, some of the neighbors who are aware of the fire at this point, they have rushed to this house. They have surrounded this house in an attempt to help in any way that they can. Because not only are they good citizens who would want to help whoever is in this house, most of them know that this is the house where Lindell Lewis lives with his girlfriend, Gloria Hart, who affectionately goes by Jeannie. And they also know that there's a man named Thomas Hughley who lives in the basement. So they're familiar with the people of this residence. So they want to help them in any way that they can. So as they surround in this house, they see Thomas Hughley come from around the back. And he's pretty shaken up because, I mean, his house is on fire. But he wasn't injured to the point of incapacity. So once he's able to escape the house and get into the hands of the neighbors, his neighbors is like, "Oh, thank God you made it out." But where is Lindell and Jeannie? And it's at this point where they see from a back window or a side window. I can't really remember which one. But out of a window, they see Lindell hanging partially out, screaming for help. And Thomas and the rest of their neighbors is pretty much just telling Lindell to jump out the window. But Lindell tells them that he don't have enough body strength to lift himself out of the window. And they're like, "Where's Jeannie? Where's Jeannie?" And he tells them that Jeannie is right outside of the bathroom and she is unconscious. And since he won't jump, Thomas knows that there's a ladder that's in the back of the house. So he goes and he tries to grab this ladder. Unfortunately, though, Lindell had chained the ladder so nobody could steal it. And Thomas was unable to unchain the ladder. So he couldn't get the ladder to Lindell. And so Thomas and their neighbors pretty much watched as Lindell disappeared from the window. And him disappearing from the window sent everybody into super panic mode. Now, finally, the firefighters do arrive. Unfortunately, though, by the time they're able to put the fire out, it was too late for Lindell and Jeannie. They had both passed away from smoke inhalation. Lindell Lewis was 65 years old when he passed away. He was one of 6 kids, and at the time of his death, he was a loving dad and granddad. And he had previously been married, but at the time of his death, he was divorced and pretty much just trying to live his life. He was described as the type who was always willing to help anybody, no matter their circumstances. And that's how Thomas ended up living in his basement. Lindell was very social. He loved to have his friends and family over for a good little barbecue where they would all be laughing and listening to music while he was on the grill. Now, there may or may not have been a couple of drinks or two in the mix as well, and it was just always a good time. But just a couple of weeks before the fire, Lindell had hip surgery, and he was in the recovery process, and he had to use a walker to get around. And so he had very limited mobility. Even to get up the stairs in his house, he would sit on the stairs and then like crawl his way up. And so this is why when people was telling him to jump out the window, he wasn't able to. He just physically couldn't do it. And then on top of his hip surgery, a couple of years prior to that, he had heart surgery as well, and he had a pacemaker. So Lindell was in pretty poor health and unfortunately was unable to save himself. Now, Jeannie, Gloria Jean Hart, she was born on May 6, 1949 in Meridian, Mississippi. And she moved to Akron when she was about 13 years old, and this is where she would build her life and career. She was a loving mother and grandmother and an amazing friend, sister, and aunt. She was 66 years old at the time of her passing. So once the fire was out and it was determined that there had been 2 deaths, the investigators had to figure out what caused the fire. They had to start investigating the fire. And what they found out was that this had been a fire that was set from the outside of the house, and that there was an accelerant used to set this fire. So this was not an accidental fire. This is not something that just happened. This was set intentionally. This was arson. And seeing as how this was arson, Lindell and Gloria's deaths were classified as homicides. So during the investigation, they got some video surveillance footage from not only Lindell's house, but from the house of a neighbor, I believe, who was across the street. And when they looked at this footage, they could see a figure clearly setting this fire. As a matter of fact, they didn't try to set this fire once or twice. They saw this person attempt to set the fire 3 separate times, and it was on that 3rd time in which they were successful. Unfortunately though, they can't see who it is because the person had on a hood and you never saw their face. So they start asking around and talking to the neighbors like, who do you know that might want to hurt Lindell and Jeannie? And a lot of the neighbors said a man named Stanley Ford and Lindell would get into it all the time. They said that Stanley did not like Lindell at all, and he damn sure didn't like Thomas. And as a matter of fact, the cameras that was on Lindell's house were put up because of Stanley. They said that Lindell and Stanley would often get into it because Stanley felt like the company that Lindell kept was unbecoming of the neighborhood. He felt like there was prostitutes coming in and out, drug dealers and users, and just all kind of shady people around Lindell's house, and he didn't like it. And as for Thomas, the man who escaped the fire, who lived in the basement, they said that Stanley didn't like him because he was a drug user and he didn't work, and he was always pandering, or was it panhandling, or whatever it was, because Thomas, no, he didn't have a typical 9-to-5 job, but he would go around asking the neighbors if he could cut their grass for some money. And Stanley felt like the money that he would get from cutting people's grasses, he was using on drugs. And so because he felt this way about Thomas, when Stanley's window got broken at his house, he assumed that it was Thomas who had tried to break into his house. And Thomas was pretty much just like, chill, I don't want nothing that you got in your house. I did not try to break in your house, and you can really just kiss my ass. But in an effort to I want to say keep the peace, Lindell offered to pay for Stanley's window, and he did. He paid the money to get Stanley's window fixed, even though he didn't think that anybody in his house was the culprit. He just didn't want no smoke. He didn't want no static, and so he paid for it. So now, with all of this information, the investigators, they obviously about to go talk to Stan. But when they talked to Stan, Stan said, yeah, no, it wasn't me. I don't like them very much, but I would not intentionally set no fire to their place. As a matter of fact, I was asleep. And because they had a couple of other suspects to look into, they moved on and they looked into these other suspects, including Lindell's ex-wife, Francine. Now, they had learned that Francine had an insurance policy out on Lindell that Lindell didn't know about. But Francine also told them, like, look, you barking up the wrong tree. It wasn't me. And so they exhausted their suspect list, but they was unable to get any concrete proof of anybody who had actually done it. Even though they had this surveillance video, they couldn't tell or determine who it was. And so, unfortunately, the arson and homicide went unsolved. And for a little minute, the neighborhood was good, quiet. Everybody was, I mean, there was still effects of the fire. Like every time they looked at that empty lot because the house had been torn down, it was a reminder of what had happened. But for the most part, the neighborhood was pretty quiet after that. But then another family moved in down the street at 693 Fultz Avenue. There was 38-year-old Angela Boggs and her partner, 35-year-old Dennis Huggins. And together they had 6 kids. There was 17-year-old Brittany Boggs, 14-year-old Jared Boggs, who were Angela's kids from a previous relationship. And then she and Dennis had 4 additional kids. There was Daisha, Kyle, Olivia, and Cameron Huggins, who were 6, 5, 3, and 1. And they were pretty much just a typical church-going, God-fearing family, but not necessarily holier than thou. The adults might have partaken in a drink or two, but not necessarily alcoholics. And then Dennis, he did sell a little piece of the devil's lettuce, but he wasn't on no Frank Lucas El Chapo type of time. His brother described it as he only sold enough to smoke for free. So he was very small time in the business. So yeah, like I said, not a terrible bunch, but here comes mean old Stanley. He is not a fan of the Boggs Huggins bunch at all. And he often tries to tell Dennis that he can't have people pulling up to his house. He can't have these functions outside and be loud. He can't do this. He can't do that. And Dennis was the type of person who was like, let me mind my business while you mind yours. You got a whole wife and kids at home. Why is you over here worried about me and mine when you should be worried about you and yours? And Stanley didn't like the fact that Dennis stood up to him. He didn't like the fact that Dennis had a voice and had a mind and had a whole entire personality of his own that wasn't in accordance to what Stanley wanted. Stanley felt like this was his neighborhood and he felt like he had a right to keep it safe by any means necessary. And he even claimed himself as the unofficial president of his one-man neighborhood watch. He actually told a couple of people that he felt like he was an angel of the neighborhood sent to keep it safe. And some of the neighbors actually liked the fact that Stan always kept an eye out. But then there was other neighbors who was like, sir, you're doing too much. But whatever, it is what it is. But then, in the early morning hours of May 15th, 2017, there will be another influx of 911 calls about a house that was on fire in this neighborhood. And this time it was the Boggs Huggins house. And one of the people who was calling in to report this fire was Stanley's wife, Zenaida Ford. And she said that they needed to get there quickly because this house was going up fast. So the firefighters get there and this house is engulfed in flames. And all the neighbors that's outside at this point are super frantic because like, not again, this cannot be happening again. There are kids in this house and they feel so helpless. So when the firefighters put this fire out, they find that there were only 7 of the 8 members in the house at the time, along with the family dog. And unfortunately, all 7 of those family members and the dog passed away in that fire. And the 7 of them who passed away were Dennis, Angela, Daisha, Jared, Kyle, Cameron, and Olivia. Their 17-year-old daughter, Brittany, was not home at the time. It's said that Dennis and Angela were found on top of 3 of their kids, the 3 youngest kids, and that Jared was found in a stairwell with the dog. And I'm not sure where the last child was found, but obviously they were in the house as well. And just to hear that Dennis and Angela spent their last moments to make sure that they kids felt protected, y'all, I'm about to tear up. Because that's really what parenthood is all about, is taking care of and protecting your kids, even when that means that your life is in danger. Just like the fire that happened a year prior in this neighborhood, this fire was also determined to be an arson. And so, yes, this was murder. And as they start to investigate, they find, again, more surveillance footage. And in this video footage, a figure is shown running towards the house before it's set on fire. And then the figure is shown running back once the fire has been set. And just like before, this figure is unidentifiable. And based off what's learned from talking to the neighbors, etc., a couple of different suspects come to mind. And one of those suspects is Stanley yet again. However, they do find somebody who is more likely to have set this fire than Stanley. And that is Angela Boggs' estranged husband, Patrick Boggs. Because they found out that Patrick Boggs actually did 12 years, because during their relationship, he had attempted to set Angela on fire. And it's not a lot of coincidences that happen in the investigation world, in the homicide world. And so, being that he had already tried to set Angela on fire once, it didn't seem like it would be above him to set her house on fire now, especially because it had been known, based off of what they had learned, that Patrick was not a fan of Angela moving on, and especially moving on and having kids with a black man. Yeah, he wasn't here for it. And so they ended up picking Patrick up on parole violations and taking him to jail just to have him in custody while they investigated this arson. And allegedly, while he was in jail, he told another inmate that he was responsible for the fire. And he said that he had set them with some lighter fluid and some charcoal. But after extensive research and investigation, searching his home, tracking his cell phone, all of the things, they determined that Patrick couldn't have been the one who set this fire, because not only did his cell phone not put him in the vicinity of Angela and Dennis's home, but they determined that the fire was not started by no damn charcoal. So he potentially just hated Angela so much that he wanted to take credit for her death, but he wasn't the guy. And after learning this put their focus back on Stanley. And based off of the surveillance footage, the searches of Stanley's 2 homes, because he didn't own 1 home on that block, he owned 2 homes. His mama lived at 1374, and then she passed away, so he inherited the home. And then when he married his wife, he and his wife bought the house next door, like right next door, which was 1370, whatever. Anyways, after a bunch of extensive investigation, Stanley Ford was arrested and hit with 29 charges, including murder for not only the Boggs-Huggins family, but for the murders of Lindell and Gloria, as well as the attempted murder of Thomas Hughley. And because Stanley is a man like Stanley, he pled not guilty. And he would end up going to trial 4 years later in August of 2021. And this wasn't no regular court case. This was a death penalty case. So at the trial, the prosecution presented plenty of video evidence from the night of both arsons. And in these videos, you can clearly see a figure running to and from these residences. And not only is this figure running to and from the residences that had caught fire, they're also running between Stanley's two residences, 1374 and 1370. And they also subpoenaed the alarm records from Stanley's residences. And it was determined that the alarm system at 1370 was armed and disarmed at the time that you could, like around the times that the figure was running to and from these arsons. Well, at least the first one, because they wasn't able to obtain the records for the date of the second one. And then they also presented a video that occurred after the second fire. And it was a video of Stan walking with the investigator. And you could see that in those two videos on the nights of the arson and Stanley walking with the investigators have the same gait. And if that wasn't enough, during a search of Stanley's homes, they ended up finding some lighter fluid and some burnt up shoes. So it's safe to say that the evidence is not evidencing in Stanley's favor. And one of the investigators said, his name was Detective Looney, I believe. I know his last name was Looney, but I don't know if he's a detective or a lieutenant. I'm sorry. But he said that when he was talking to Stanley after this second fire, the Stanley said that he was in the bed and that his wife woke him up. And when Stanley said that, his wife kind of cut him a look like, no, I don't remember that. But she didn't say nothing out loud. It was all facial expressions like, nigga, what are you talking about? And that piqued the investigator's interest at that point because her face said you lying. And I think you lying too. But anyway, the prosecution presented all of this evidence and said that Stanley was guilty. But the defense said that Stanley was not guilty. And while both of these arsons and murders were a tremendous tragedy, Stanley didn't do it. And the prosecutors and the people who were investigating this case never fully looked into the other suspects who were clearly suspects. The defense tried their best, but the jury ended up siding with the prosecution and they found Stanley guilty of all but 3 charges. But in order for the death penalty to remain on the table, all 12 jurors had to vote unanimously for the death penalty. However, they ended up in an 11-1 vote for the death penalty. So there was one person who said, nah, I'm not here for the death penalty. And so he couldn't be sentenced to death. And so the judge had to take that into consideration. And when it was time for her to impose her sentence upon Stanley, she didn't hold back at all. She did her big one. And she sentenced Stanley Ford to 9 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole for each murder that he committed, on top of 21 years for the remaining counts. And then she sentenced this man to solitary confinement for the remainder of his years every single year on the following dates: January 10th, January 15th, April 18th, May 17th, December 8th, and December 23rd. And if you're wondering why she sent him to solitary confinement on these dates, it's because those are the 5 birthdays of the children who he murdered and the date of the first fire. Because she wants him to remember every single year on these dates what he did. And quite frankly, I'm glad that she imposed this solitary confinement to him on these dates, because he deserves to sit in solace and think about the tragedy that he have caused, about the pain that he's caused, about what he did to these 2 families, all because he wants to be this angel of the fucking neighborhood and protect his neighborhood. Sir, there were so many other ways that you could have went about this. You present as a male Karen anyway, so why you just didn't call the cops? If these people were doing what you thought they were doing, i.e. prostitution, drug use, drug dealing, drug using, like all of the things, why you just didn't call the police? Why did you have to take the matters into your own hands and get rid of them? Anyways, like I said, I'm glad that she imposed this sentence because he showed no remorse. He was cold and callous throughout the entire thing. So much so to the point that when there was a vigil held for the Boggs and Huggins family, he went up to Brittany and he hugged her and told her that he don't know who could be so cold as to do such a thing, and that he hopes whoever did this, they find and the person burns in hell. Well, welcome to your fate, sir. Anyways, y'all, that is all I have for today's case. Thank you all so very much for watching. Let me know what you thought about today's case down in the comments. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you all in the next one. I understand, but is she by the same bubble? All right, y'all. So, what the fuck you want? I don't know who this is. Lindell had chained the ladder, so they end up checking out. So they got some of the, and so because a lot of the people said that Stan was, oh, my sister is funny. Hold on. Oh, can y'all see that? Hold on. My sister texted me. And based off what they learned from talking to and after learning this put they, and after learning this put they, why do I can't say that word? And so, ooh, was it 1374? Ooh, okay. Whatever. Anyway, after a bunch of extensive research, no,